E-L-O-E-J, a little aloha in our day. Spread a little aloha around the world at breakfast with Bob.
Thank you, Poncho Man. Welcome, everybody, back to Breakfast with Bob, Not Quite Kona edition. We are brought to you by Hoka One One by Master Spas, Class USA, UCAN, Hyper Ice, Premium Plus Sports, Form Smart Swim Goggles, and of course, our Challenged Athletes Foundation. We just sent out 3,038 grants totaling $5.1 million to keep challenged athletes in the game of life through sport. Our next guest, Sika Henry, she is the first professional triathlete, the first African-American professional triathlete who happens to be a woman at the same time. How you doing, Sika? So nice to finally get to chat with you.
Oh my gosh, this has been a dream of mine. I told my dad, I'm like, if I ever am on Breakfast with Bob, I have made it in the triathlon world. So I can retire now.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, from my perspective, it is so cool because back in the day, we had Max Fennell on when he went pro, and he's obviously had a huge impact on we see obviously more and more African-American men participating in the sport. And I think you're having that same effect. When you go to races and see other African-American women out there, that must make you feel pretty good.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily me that's contributed any to that, but it's great to see that the numbers of participation is growing. And even on media and social media and covers of magazines and stuff, I've noticed a huge pickup in those things over the past 2 years.
Yeah, it's been cool. And so for you, you swam in high school. You were a high jumper in college.
Yes.
And what was your best height? What was your best jump?
It wasn't really that good. About 5'6".
5'6" is pretty damn good.
Yeah. I'm also very tall, so.
Yeah. So, and two-time marathon champion. And so when did you find triathlon? Obviously with the swim background, that's half the game, because swimming, to me, that's the hardest thing. People are scared to death of the swim.
Right. So I grew up a swimmer, but not club. So I wasn't one of those athletes swimming twice a day or anything like that, which shows now because it's one of my weakest events. But I did swim for my high school. So it was just the season from, I guess, November to February every year. So yeah, I grew up doing that. And then I went on to do track and field in college. I also ran the 200 and the 400. And I think the triathlon always just been on my bucket list. Just like I had to swim. I started getting into running. And then at the time I was going through a really bad breakup, and I'm like, I need a distraction. What can I do to take my mind off of what I'm going through? And there happened to be a sprint triathlon at Buckrow Beach. Was like, it's about 15 minutes from me. And I'm like, oh, that's perfect. So yes. I went and bought a mountain bike from Dick's and a swimsuit, and I did it.
Yeah, and that's what people don't quite understand. And they see the Ironman on TV and think, oh my God, I could never do that. But you borrow a bike, get a bike with cobwebs on it, you get yourself a swimsuit and a pair of goggles, and you're pretty much golden. A pair of running shoes. There isn't as much of a deterrent to the sport as a lot of people think.
Right. Yeah. Getting into it, especially sprint. I didn't want to invest all that money and try something crazy because I wasn't sure how much I was even going to like it. It might have been a one and done thing. So I didn't want to go out and buy a time trial or, a triathlon bike. Not that I knew that stuff really existed. I didn't know there was a difference between carbon fiber and aluminum and getting clipped in. And I was so clueless. I had no idea. And of course, my first sprint, everybody's flying by me in arrow position. And I'm like, what is this?
Who are these aliens going by? And what's going on here? Yeah. So, but when you finished that first sprint, what was the feeling? What was the feeling like?
Oh, it was awesome. Cloud nine. You don't go in. I didn't have any expectations. I just wanted to try something new and finish. And I came in pretty close to last, actually. So, but I didn't care at the time. It was just so much fun. Yeah. Just trying something new. And, the nerves of not knowing if you're going to finish and if you can actually do it. And then you do it and you finish. And it was so awesome.
And what was the response when you did that first triathlon in terms of your friends, family? Were they like, you did what?
Not really. My parents, I've always been kind of like that. I went to I high jumped in college, but I never even tried track and field till the end of my senior year of high school. And as soon as I jumped, I was like, oh, I love this. I want to do this in college. My parents were like, okay. So I've just always been like that. They didn't turn their head until I was like, yeah, I want to try to turn pro. And they're like, whoa, what's going on here?
Wait, you've got an economics degree, you've got a real job here, and you want to go pro as a triathlete and basically make zero, right? Make very little. Trying to balance having a real job with being a professional triathlete, how hard has that been?
It's really hard. Yeah, I'm not going to lie. It's exhausting. It took me a couple years to figure out how to balance the two. Initially, I started going to like master swim in the morning. So I'd get up at like 4:30, but then I would find myself crashing at work at like, 1 p.m. And I felt like the benefits that I was gaining from being a faster swimmer, swimming with the group wasn't paying off in terms of how I felt the rest of the day. And I was struggling at my job. So I had to learn how to manipulate things in order to fit my own schedule. So I work out at lunch on my lunch break. I'm really lucky my job has showers. So I work out at lunch and then I work out after work. So, and then I do like my longest training blocks on the weekends. But yeah, I'm not going to lie. It's really difficult to balance the two.
Well, especially when you go to races, like you were just at Augusta 70.3 and a lot of the other pros there, that's what they do. That's it. They race, they recover, they train, and then they do it again, where you're doing a real job in the middle of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was like I raced Sunday, flew back Monday, back to work Tuesday. Yeah.
Now, how was Augusta your first 70.3 as a pro?
Yes. Yep. My first pro race.
Pretty fun?
I don't know if I call that fun. It was interesting. It was a new experience. I really struggled, actually. It was a very hard, disappointing race for me. I trained all summer. I put a lot of effort and energy and time into getting as fit as possible. And I did have expectations of doing better, not just against the competition, but even in terms of, splits and power output and everything. And I just missed the mark on every single leg. So that was just mentally, it was very draining to keep going in the race when I wanted to drop out.
The hard part is you went 4:49:45, but the hardest thing is, and I've been hypothermic before. You come out of the water and you're shivering. You have no power. You're sort of in a little bit of a cocoon of you're a little numb and you don't quite know what's going on. And for the first 20 miles of the bike, that's sort of where you were at. Yeah.
And I was, of course, beating myself up because I did this race back in 2019. I did it 5 months after a really major bike accident, and I actually biked minutes faster at that race. So to come back a couple years later with so much experience and fitness under my belt to bike way slower, even as I was riding, it was really hard to wrap my mind around that and keep going. But now looking back and putting things into perspective, I do think that not wearing a wetsuit, because the pros couldn't wear wetsuits, age groupers couldn't. The fact that I didn't have that, I have very little body fat. I mean, I'm like 5'10" and I don't even weigh 130. So yeah. And just, I was just so cold initially on the bike. It took a while. And I think, maybe the shivering and trying to warm up took more energy out of me than I realized.
And talk a little bit about that bike crash, because it's a broken nose, loose teeth, lacerated face, 30 stitches. Getting back on a bike after a crash like that is not the easiest thing in the world.
No. That was one of the hardest things I've ever been through. I wouldn't wish that upon anybody. The mental toll that it takes, especially when it's something so I guess there's a vanity aspect to it. It was my face, and I had to look in the mirror every day and see my face totally destroyed. And, I had to have surgeries and everything else. So there was a lot going on mentally. I think in some ways, the fact that I don't remember the crash was kind of a blessing in disguise. I've spoken about the fact that when I woke up in the hospital and the doctors had to explain what happened, I thought I had been in a car accident. And that's what my mind kind of believed. I never felt like I was in a bike accident. So I never was scared to get back on a bike. I was
Right.
actually scared to start driving again, which is weird.
That is weird.
Yeah, the first couple times I drove after the accident, my hands were shaking. I thought I had been in a car accident. So yeah, getting back on the bike, I wasn't, for whatever reason, wasn't nervous. Of course, now in races, I'm more aware. I do get nervous if, like a giraffe pack comes flying by me on the course or something like that. I immediately sit up and get scared. Or people when I'm passing, not that I've been really passing anybody, but when I do pass somebody, I'm like shouting out like on your left to make sure that they don't, take me out or something. So it does play some role
Sure.
in how I race and how I feel in races.
So in 2019, you went to Kona and went 11:35 there. And just talk a little bit about that experience, because that's the pinnacle, right? Being in Kona it's just special. Was it special for you?
Oh, it was once in a lifetime. I can tell, like, I can't even explain how wonderful that feeling was. You watch it on TV, but experiencing it in person, like running down the lead drive and just like all the energy and the beauty. And there were times out there, like as much pain and agony I was in, I was still looking around like, wow, this is so beautiful. I can't believe I'm doing this. And it is different than any other course, any other race, because you're truly you're amongst the best triathletes in the world. Yeah, it was amazing. And then of course, nothing's like crossing the finish line and hearing Mike Riley, say your name on the loudspeaker and you're like, wow, I did it. I survived it.
And when did it start going through your head that you wanted to be a pro? Because I've 2019, it's actually 2017, 70.3 world's finisher. So you had five 70.3 age group podiums and fastest run as an amateur at Augusta. So you had some great success as an amateur. When did it go through your head? You know what? Pro would be a good thing to do.
Before all that, actually.
Really? Even before?
Yeah.
Well, all of this was sort of a precursor, just sort of a setting up.
Yeah. When I first started getting into the sport and I looked around, I just didn't really see people that looked like me in terms of an African-American woman. Right. And I was genuinely just curious as to why that was. And I started, researching. And then when I found out that there had never been an African-American pro woman before, I'm like, okay, that would be really cool if that were me.
Yes.
And I wondered what type of impact that would make. Would it change the sport at all? Could I influence, a younger person to want to get into the sport or want to pick up swim lessons or something like that? So yeah, it's kind of like, I want that to be my goal. I want to be that person that, steps up and, makes an impact somehow. So I think it was before I was even, before all of those awards and stuff. And I hired Coach Johnny and I'm like, turn me into a pro triathlete. And I was slow. So, I really had some nerve putting it out there, but.
That's what life's all about, right? You put it out there.
Yeah.
What do you think in terms of the African-American population? Is a deterrent, is it primarily the swim, you think? What do you think keeps people from getting into the sport?
Yeah, I think it's multifaceted. So it's not even a deterrent, I guess. Well, and then there is that, but also barriers. And yes, the swim is a major barrier. And I've seen you talk about this on your show before, about 64% of African Americans lack basic swim skills. And if you can't swim, you can't do triathlon. So I think there's that. And then this crosses all demographics. It's an expensive sport when you want to try to get competitive and move up to, the long distance and stuff. So there's that financial barrier. And then, the popularity of, as popular as this sport seems to me, it's not a mainstream sport. So,
right.
We're not watching it on TV. And if we are, it's just Kona. And that seems like just some, crazy extreme event.
What I see, and it's funny because one of my big pushes over the years has been these pool triathlons, where you run a 5K and do a 10-mile bike ride. And then the swim is in a pool at the end, 150-yard swim in a pool, because it's warm. There's lane lines, there's lifeguards, there's walls. And you look at when you have those events, we have a bunch of them here in Southern Cal, all of a sudden the population is, it's 50% men, 50% women, a lot more people of color, a lot more different demographic groups because the events are cheaper. So I look at those events and I think that as you go up in distance, you get less and less diversity. right? Because it is more expensive. The swim is longer. It's
Right.
potentially, it seems more overwhelming. How do you see changing things? Do you see, working to get kids into the pool and teaching swimming? Is that step number one?
For me, that is.
Yeah.
That's actually something that I'm working on right now with a group out here, and something that you brought up about having pool swims and sprints and stuff. Mm-hmm. I would have never gotten to sport if there wasn't a local sprint. So There's no way I would have tried triathlon if my only option was a half Ironman or a full Ironman.
Right.
So in fact, the sprint that I did, it was only a 500-yard swim, and it was in the bay, and it was shallow. So
you could stop and stand if you needed to.
Yeah, practically. Right. So if I didn't have access to that, and it was only, these huge long distance, right. I would never have gotten into the sport. So I think it's really important to keep those local races in business. And just this past summer, I went to Rev 3 Williamsburg, and the day before the race, they had a kids duathlon.
Yes.
So it was run, bike, run, and there were such a mix of kids. I had actually spoken to one of the groups before the race. They're called Grit Masters, and it's predominantly African-American children, and they participated in it. So it's having also those, smaller events that cater to children. It's fun, it's doable. It's a good introduction to the sport. But yeah, I think it does start with swim lessons, though.
It does, and I know that's one of the things Bernard Lyles in Chicago with TriMasters. One of the things that he's been doing for years is getting kids into triathlon, and obviously doing swim classes all the time, because nothing else, people become drown proof, and that's one of the bigger. I know in LA, I think it's one of the highest incidents of child mortality under 10 years old is drowning, and for African-American kids. And that's obviously a huge issue to get people drown proofed. And if they get into triathlon, great, but learning to swim is just essential.
Exactly. Yep. It's a life-saving skill. And whether it brings you to triathlon or not, it's so important. I like that being in this position and people seeing me doing triathlon in the sport, It might get them interested in swimming, or a parent might see it and be like, you know what, let me enroll my kid in swim lessons just because of this. So that makes it worth it.
Have you had somebody reach out and ask about the sport of triathlon who then ended up doing triathlon?
Oh, a few. I've had so many crazy stories. In some ways, that's what brought me back to this sport.
Yeah.
So after my accident, the first couple of days, I was like, I'm done. I quit.
Right. I'm out.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
I'm gone. Yeah.
I look disfigured, face is smashed. Like, this sport is not worth it. And then I did question how much even chasing after being the first, Black pro woman was worth it. I'm like, this is not it. But then when I was recuperating at my parents' house, I couldn't believe how much mail and letters and stuff from kids that I received, messages through Facebook. I mean, absolutely, it was mind-blowing. I had no idea how important or how far my story had reached and the impact on that. So when I first got into the sport, I started blogging. So I blogged from my very first triathlon all the way up till I got my pro card. And I didn't realize how many people were actually following that story. So when I crashed and everything, and I was like, I quit, and people reached out and they're like, no, you got to keep going. Like, this is so great. We want to see you on that pro field. And, I want my daughter to have somebody to look up to. That's when it really opened my eyes. Like, no, this is important. Like, I can't stop now. Like, there's a reason that I'm in this position and I need to keep going. So
no question about it. It's funny when you look at people who impact our world and change the sport. Sometimes you don't realize it until a crash, until people are like, no, we need you, because you're sort of just going forward and not realizing that you're not living in a bubble, that there's all these people out here who are going, if Sika can do it, I can do it. Yeah. And I love what you're doing. And I love the fact that Hoka jumped in early on and said, Sika, we believe in you and we want to support you. And we don't really care. You go pro or don't go pro. It doesn't matter. We're going to support you no matter what. How important was that for you?
Oh, I mean, you dream of having a major sponsor, and, most people are in a position, they're fast enough to get one.
Right.
Sometimes I'm like, I can't believe that I've been blessed with it, because I'm definitely not podium. I'm not on the podium. I'm not qualifying as a pro for Worlds and stuff. But yet, back in 2017, I actually spoke at Triathlon Business International Conference.
Yep.
And I met Eric Gilsman, and
Yes.
I was on the stage then, and I was slow then, and I talked about wanting to go pro and wanting to have a major impact on the sport, and that I thought representation was important and diversity. And I put that all out there, and he came up to me and he's like, I like your story. And as you know, I want Hoka to back you and support you, and as much as we can to see wherever you get, like no pressure. But of course, when he came up to me, I wasn't wearing Hokas at the time. I was like, wait, those big, ugly moon shoes? Like, no. I'm like, no, I don't want to wear those. He's like, I'm just going to send you a few pair. You see how you like them. And so I'm like, all right, fine. And then, of course, I think it was the Cliftons that I immediately fell in love with. And yeah, Hoka's been supporting me ever since. And I'm so appreciative of that.
Love it. Sika, thank you for what you bring to the sport. It just we need more diversity in our sport. We need more people to realize this is the greatest sport on the planet, and it changes lives for the better. And
right.
you're playing a huge instrumental role in making that happen. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it as well. Yeah. I recently posted that, I think it was on Instagram, like, I don't expect everybody to understand this and why it's important to me and why representation is important. It's okay. Like, I've come to peace with the fact that nobody's going to be on board with that, but all I can do is share my story and how I've come to discover how important it is. And if it can make an impact in any way, then all of it's worth it. The crash, everything. It's totally worth it. So,
Sika, thank you for taking time. And hopefully we'll be doing this at Clash Daytona or Miami or Kona. We'll be doing this live and in person. That'd be fun.
Okay, that'd be awesome. Yep, I hope so.
Sika Henry has been our guest, everybody. Again, Breakfast with Bob, not quite Kona edition. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time. See ya.
Bye. Thank you.